Hello, my name is Jay Lahee, and I'm a art teacher at Central Middle School here in Columbus, and we're here to interview the Smith family today concerning generations of their clan growing and living in Columbus. We have with us Alan Smith II, Prentess Smith, and Bob Smith. Bob and Alan are the sons of Prentess Smith, and Alan II is Alan's son. So as we get started here, I'm going to go ahead and ask a few questions, and anybody that wants to answer this question that I ask it may do so and just start talking. But I'd like for you to explain in your own words and share with us some of your memories of growing up and living in Columbus. And whoever would like to go first with that is fine with me.
You can start, Mom.
Well, I guess being the oldest and being the mother, when I was born here in Columbus 91 years ago, and I went to a black school until I graduated out of the 7th into the 8th. And when I went into the 8th, I went into the Central High School, and that's where I graduated in 1925. And it was it was nice, but going from one school like that into nothing but white and being only black, it made a little difference. And sometimes you felt kind of uneasy. Mm-hmm. But I managed, and I graduated from there.
And you were the only black in the school?
Now, for that time, until the others come in school. Mm-hmm.
Was there a black school in Columbus?
Yes, on the 14th and Union.
Mm-hmm. Did you attend that school?
Yes, I did.
You did.
Until I got into the 8th grade, and then they closed it.
14th and Union Streets in Columbus is where
it
was.
It was a black school.
So when you were in 8th grade, you must have been about 14 years old then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Went into the Central High School.
And
that was the only high school. Central was the only high school in Columbus at that time.
I see. And that's the current building that's Columbus Central
it's
Middle
Central.
School.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Alan, can you share some of your experiences with us about living and growing up in Columbus, where you attended school and what it was like for you?
Yeah, I started off at Jefferson School, which is over on, I think, on 12th and Sycamore, 12th and Sycamore. And then when they closed that, I was in the 5th grade, and they closed that school down. I went to the 6th grade at Lincoln School, was down on Franklin Street, 3rd and Franklin. Then went from there to Central High School, Central Junior High, which was Wilson School, Wilson Junior High then.
I see.
And then I was one of the, went from there into the new high school. When they built the new high school, I think we was the first graduating class out of the new high school, 57.
I see.
But it was, I didn't have much, I had some problems, but not a whole lot of problems growing up.
Now the Lincoln School that you attended is not the new Lincoln School that's on,
No.
I want to say 5th Street now.
No, this is on 3rd and Franklin.
Right, and it's been made into an apartment building, and it might be business now. I'm not sure.
Office building.
It's an office buildings now,
Yeah.
and that structure is still there.
Yes, the building's still there.
That was a 1st through 6th grade school.
Yeah, I believe it was, yeah.
Okay, okay. Bob, what about some of your experiences?
Well, I started off at the 1st grade. I went to Wilson. That school went through the 8th grade. There I was moved to Jefferson in the 1st grade, second half. And from there I went to Wilson Junior High, 7th and 8th grade, and then went to the high school, which was Columbus High School at that time. And I graduated from there in 1953. And the school that I started out at Wilson, and they transferred me to Jefferson because of the school districts. And of course my brother, older brother, Buddy, he was in junior high at Wilson at that time. And I went to the 1st grade at Wilson, and then I went to the 2nd grade, skipped the first half of the 3rd grade, went into the 4th grade at Jefferson, and graduated from Central in 1953. We were supposed to be the first class to graduate from the new high school at that time, but they didn't get it completed.
I see. And when you say Wilson, when you first started there, Wilson is one of the buildings which is part of Central Middle School now.
Yes.
And it still was. That's the same Wilson building, I would assume. And So that was a first grade, that was a elementary school at one time, and then when they built Jefferson, it became a middle school.
Dream of junior
I
high.
see. I
Junior
see.
high.
Okay, okay, junior high.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, Alan II, can you tell me about some of your experiences?
I guess I'll start with education as well. I went to Lincoln Elementary, not the same one my father went to. I went to the new one that is now currently over on 5th Street. And I was there for 3 years, and then our family moved, and then I went to Jefferson, the same Jefferson that they also attended. And then we moved one more time out into, at that time, what we considered the country, which was out off of State Road 9 in addition called Hammer Heights, and at that time I attended Rock Creek Elementary School. After attending Rock Creek, I went to Southside Junior High School, which is now Southside Elementary, and then came to East High School, and then graduated from East High School in 1983, and then went on to college. So growing up, though, in Columbus and thinking about experiences and stuff, I guess there weren't a whole lot of negative experiences for me myself. I had friends who did have negative experiences, and I think one of the reasons why I was kind of not involved with that was because of where we lived at the time and where my parents still currently live, and that's kind of out in the country a little bit. So we really weren't exposed to a lot of the things that my peers, my black peers, were exposed to here in town of Columbus.
Okay. Well, that brings me to another question here. Can any of you recall racial upheavals or times when you felt people were being treated unfair?
I can. I can remember when we couldn't go in any restaurants and sit down and eat in any of the restaurants in Columbus. We go to the movies. We couldn't sit downstairs. We had to go upstairs. And then in some of the other places, they treat you different. They watch you when you go in. They watch you. They follow you around because they think you're going to take something. But most thing that was really bad in Columbus for the blacks, I think, was the eating establishments. They would not let you sit down and eat in the establishments. You had to get it and go outside or something like that.
You
And
had
there
certain restaurants you had to
Yeah,
go
there
to.
was certain restaurants. In fact, there was one in particular that one of the other people in town kind of got it stopped. And I won't mention any name, but they kind of got it stopped from happening in one of the restaurants. Where some of the older students, like my brother and a buddy, the one in his age group, they had problems in one of the restaurants here in town, and some of the more prominent people stopped it in that particular restaurant.
You
But
remember that,
still-
Bob?
See, I can remember that when I was in high school, after we'd have football practice or basketball practice, we'd go out and eat. And there was one place which was really where a lot of people went. And I went up there with them one evening, and they brought our meal, but they brought theirs on plates, brought mine in a sack. And the boys I were with just left everything, and we left. And the next day I had a phone call. They called to my aunt's house because we didn't have a phone at the time. And they told me to get the same group of boys and go back to that restaurant. And I don't know who it was that called, or I don't know who it was that had anything to do with it. But we went back up to that restaurant and went in and we ordered, and they brought all of our food on plates.
Is that right?
And we sat there and ate. Now, there's been other places here in town which, just flat out say, you take it outside, you take it home. And there was 3 or 4 real nice places here in town, like Zaharico's downtown and what we used to call the Olympia. We were welcome in there quite a bit. But other places here in town, the only way we'd go into those restaurants was go in to clean it up or go in and take the food out.
I see. And this was in the 50s,
This was in the
And-
50s.
perhaps in the 60s too, part of that time, or mostly in the 50s?
Mostly in the
Mostly in the
50s. I
50s.
can remember mostly in the 50s.
That's interesting. Prentess, can you recall any upheavals or times when you felt that you or others were treated unfair?
Well, I always thought that my skin wouldn't have anything, my color of my skin wouldn't have anything to be going into eating. And I always said, if we couldn't go down and eat with them, why do they have us to cook for them?
So many
That's
of the
same-
restaurants had
have
black people cooking
doing
in the
cooking,
restaurants.
but we couldn't go in and sit down.
I see. Very unjust.
Another incident that I can recall that involved my mom was back in the 60s when Lyndon Johnson was president. And Lady Bird Johnson came to Columbus. And my mother was invited to go to the dinner with him. And she was at the dinner, and there was a lot of people, resented that, both black and white. And that was one of the negative things that we had around at that time. She was upset after the event, but doing the dinner and everything, she really enjoyed herself. I mean, not very often that, especially in a town this size, that the black people would sit hand in hand with the president's wife, the president of the United States. And that's one of the things she's got to accomplish.
Well, that's neat.
My dad, to add on to that, my dad, he didn't really want to go at the beginning, but they said, well, somebody evidently turned their name in to be there. So I think my mom talked him into going, and he finally went, and he enjoyed himself, but still, you could still feel he said you can still feel the tension, everybody looking at him, and if I'm not mistaken, I think they sat either with Lady Bird Johnson or close to her table.
We would sit in when, now they came in the gym first, a lot of people, there's a table there, but that was that, but we went down where she was. And then we sat in there, and the lady I worked for, I sat just as far from her table as I am to my son's table, just that close.
Was that in the 60s?
Yeah, and we're down there, and people come to my husband and said, how did you and Prentess get to go over to that dinner? He said, I don't know, said ask Prentess. And if anybody would ask me, I couldn't tell them. And I don't know how my name got in there, but my name was entered. And they told me after you had to be screened. Everybody had to be screened through the government before you could get a ticket to go in.
But you didn't have to get screened, did you?
No, but see, to get the ticket, to be invited.
I see.
And then in there and to walk around and see white people talking and speaking and things, and I was even ignored by my own color that was there.
That's interesting. Alan, second, can you recall any acts of racial upheaval or anything like that in your time, you graduated in the 80s?
In the 80s, 83.
83 for me.
Probably the biggest problem that I had, and probably my peers, my age group, was probably dating. Was the biggest thing. Interracial dating at that time, even prior to that, was just something that was looked down upon, and you really didn't do it. And it wasn't so much that if I wanted to date a white girl that she opposed, it was her parents who opposed. And they would think that, I was a great guy, or my friends were great guys, and this and that, but I guess they were more worried about what people in the community were going to think about them. Oh, here you are letting your daughter, date a black guy, even if he's a nice black guy and he's prominent or this or that, but just the fact that, you're allowing your daughter to do that was where the problem came in. And there were times, even in 1983, where you'd have to sneak, and date these people, if you really wanted to have any type of relationship with them. As far as feeling direct acts of prejudice, again, I did not run into that much, just for the fact of, again, the things I was involved in the places that I went, it wasn't just prevalent to me.
Let's see.
Now, I can say this, as I have come into my adult years, I do see it a lot more, in my profession, and then just in and around town. And I guess when you're younger and you're an adolescent, you're a teenager, you really don't think too much about it. But now I look back on things that did happen. I look at things that are going on now where I do run into problems with prejudice, and where I do see it a lot more in our community.
Do you think then that interracial relations are more acceptable now, as far as dating?
I think
And-
they definitely are more acceptable now than what they were, say, when I was in high school and stuff. It is still something that I think is not fully accepted, but it's tolerated more or accepted more. So.
I see.
I think on that, I think it's mostly the older generation that ejects more than the younger generation. Because some of the younger generation now, they don't care what color your skin. If they like you, they like you. If they don't, they don't. And I think it's mostly the younger generation that if they like you, they like you. They want to go out with you, they go out with you. They don't care what anybody says. But it's mostly the older generation, like the parents and some of those that's come up in the 50s and the 60s that still look down on it. I think they look down on it too because I think they look more of what people think of them than they do anything else.
I see.
And I do think most of the interracial family is by the parents. Because when the children had come up, the parents taught them about black don't do this and black will do that. And what the black will do and all like that.
I can understand that.
I think it was the parents.
Yes.
Because if the children, back those days like they are now, they don't care about the color.
Right.
But the parents is always the one to tell you about that black man. He'll get you, he'll do this to that too. And it was taught from the parents.
I can understand that. I was raised in Muncie, Indiana, and I had a lot of black friends, and I felt like I had some friends in particular that had me over to their house for dinner before, some black friends. And then when I wanted to return that act or that favor, my parents said no to me. And it really hurt my feelings. It really did. But that was the way my parents thought. And it's similar to some of the things that you've just said, you know, and this was back in the 70s, and I can remember it real well.
I think there are degrees of prejudice too. Again, thinking back to when I was growing up, as I said, you know, I did not feel or have some of the problems that, you know, my black peers had. I think one of the reasons is that when they would view you, again, when I said, you know, there are different levels of prejudice. I mean, if they would view a particular black who, say, is doing well, who's a good athlete or is a good student or is involved in community, whereas there's one who isn't an athlete or anything like that and, you know, really isn't doing anything, just kind of going through school and doing their things, they would look more positively at that one who is a good athlete or a good student or something than just one who, you know, is not doing extracurricular activity and things like that. And to me, you know, that was almost a double prejudice standard. Not only were they being prejudiced because they were black, they were being prejudiced because they weren't as active as another black.
Good point. Can any of you think of stories or experiences involving friends or family again that, similar to what we've talked about, that would be acts of indiscrimination or inequality, maybe towards labor or work relations, or perhaps where blacks could work or where they couldn't work in terms of employment in Columbus?
I think mostly here in Columbus, employment is pretty well open for the blacks, but there were times when we have factories here in town that are top-notch factories that would not hire blacks, and this was up in the 50s and the 60s, and it wasn't until certain people here in town began to back the blacks and started getting them into these different companies and into the positions that they are. But it was well known at one factory here in town that, you know, if you was dark skinned, whether you black, Mexican, or whatever, you didn't work there. And one person was hired there, and he was on the verge of quitting, but he stuck it out, and fortunately he retired from that place, but he was the one that started them, you know, hiring blacks at this one factory. And most of this came about, you know, the Martin Luther King march and all that. It carried its impact here in Columbus because what was going on out that we could see on TV and everything.
You're referring to the Civil Rights Movement?
Civil rights movement.
Yes.
That, when you watch it on TV and you we started doing the things that they, say the nonviolence and all that. The people in Columbus here, we started pushing things, and we finally worked our way into where we could do a lot of things in this town that you couldn't do in many, many other communities around the country. I know back in the early 50s, on the late 40s, we were told that we couldn't go to the swimming pool here in Columbus, and we pushed that. Myself, John Hogue, and a few others, we went out there and said we was going to go swimming. Well, it came to the fact that it wasn't the park, or it wasn't the person that owned the park or donated the park that said we couldn't go. It was the community. They just got it in their minds that we couldn't go, and we always thought we couldn't go. So we went, and they said, sure, as fast as you can get in the water, you can go swimming. It doesn't matter to them what color we were or whatever. And same way it was with Little League Baseball and a few of the other Little League things around town. They had the reputation that, the blacks couldn't compete. But it was the people that had nothing to do with the program that started the rumors. The program itself, you were welcome.
So it was politics a lot of
Yeah,
times.
it was more politics. And to this day, I've noticed, and I've talked to you about it, and I've mentioned it to the coaches, the high school and everything, that athletes in this town do not compete at the lower levels. You find very, very few black kids playing baseball. You find very, very few black kids playing basketball in elementary schools. You find very few black kids, running track or anything like that. They get up into junior high, and then you get a few more. And then they get up in the high school, and you get a few more, but as they get up in the high school, there's an air going around that, certain coaches don't want blacks on their teams. And I talked to the coaches out at high school why it is that, we can't get the black kids more interested in sports around the town. And come back to sports and everything, there's only 2 blacks that I know of in the city of Columbus that coaches. That's myself and Melbert Good, who coaches at the East High School level. And I don't know why it is that we don't have more. I don't know why it is that the blacks won't participate. And I'm pretty sure they're welcome, but I think the white community has got to come out and really make them feel welcome. I know I've never had any problem. In fact, I've had times when, I go out to coach, and these kids, they want me for their coaches. They want me for their coach and so forth. So I don't know what the problem there is. But it's got to do something with race. That's very obvious.
I can see that, Bob, and I remember for 18 years of coaching football here, in which many of those were with you. You're very much right, and there is a pattern of the kids, they don't seem to get involved in the elementary school, and it's the middle school that they seem to get more involved in a lot of times, and you kind of have to prod them along sometimes to come out for football or to come out for basketball. And there are kids that have just as much ability as anyone, but I've seen that happen too.
I've heard a lot of young athletes that say that can play sports. They say that they like to go out, but it wouldn't do no good because they wouldn't make the team because of their color. Now, again, that's a lot of things that's going around, but when I was in school, I never had any problems on any of the sports that I played. I played all 4 years that I was in high school, freshman up to senior year. I was playing varsity, running varsity track, and playing junior varsity basketball. Then the last 2 years, I was playing varsity basketball, and that was under Stearman in basketball. And Gerald Quillen was in the track. And they pushed, if you was a good athlete, they pushed you into the sports. But you had to get your grades. You had to have your grades in order to play the sports, and they pushed that too. In order to play sports, you had to have your grades. And they seen that you worked and got your grades if you wanted to play sport. Regardless of how good you was, if you did make your grades, you didn't play sports.
Now that was if your skin was black or white.
Yeah,
that was the
yeah,
rule.
that was the way the coaches back then were. If you didn't, regardless who you was, if you didn't make your grades, you don't play sports. We don't care how good you are. But nowadays, I don't know how it is now because I'm not involved since my sons are out of school. I'm not involved in it as much as I was when they was in there. But I'm sure that it's the same way now, probably a little more stricter.
Well, let's ask younger Alan here.
Say, I don't.
When did you get involved in sports?
Well, I started playing sports when I was in 4th grade. Started playing PAL football. But just kind of to talk a little about what each of my uncle and my father said, I think it goes back to what I had said earlier about how people are viewing that particular individual. Again, a double standard of prejudice. You know, a lot of people are familiar with my Uncle Bob. You know, they know him as Smitty. Oh, he was my coach and this and that. So, you know, they look at him as someone who they know and someone who is good and this and that, whereas there's someone who may be just as good, but people don't know who they are and won't give them that opportunity. As far as with the athletes, a lot of them do not go out for sports just because they know that if they go out, they're not going to, they may make the team, but they're not going to play. You know, and that is true unless, again, it's someone who is an exceptional athlete or someone who knows someone. And I think that that's true at each of the high schools. I've seen it. And it's not just I see it mostly in basketball, but I see a little bit of it in all the sports. But here in Columbus, primarily in basketball. And there is some truth to what the young men say today as far as there's no sense in them going out for the team because if they get on the team, they're not going to play. And it's just, it's a shame sometimes because there are good athletes who are out there who could do good. But it's a shame that they get discouraged that they don't even want to go out for it. I think it's, you know, first of all, they're at fault for not trying, but then again, the system is at fault for not encouraging them to try. So.
It's understandable. This is kind of related to sports. Didn't the old 8th Street field, which is still got a cinder track around it and the football grass in the middle, didn't that used to be the Columbus High School football field at one
Yes, it
time?
was.
Columbus High School football field and baseball field and track field, all in one.
And Prentess,
And
didn't you raise your family not
Right
too far
there.
from there?
I thought all they had to do to go down the hill and go across
Is that right?
across the levee.
I see.
Lived right there on Jackson Street.
Used to be a concrete stadium back there. I had locker rooms and stuff down underneath of it. And that's hard to believe to look at it now, but that's what it used to be. I think all that had to be torn down because of the flood level.
Yes, we've seen that flood quite a bit. I want to get back to a little bit about labor relations here. Prentess, I want to ask you a question. Do you remember a time that did your husband ever feel like he was not able to get a job somewhere where he wanted to get a job, or did he feel like he couldn't work where he wanted to, or anything like that?
No, because when my husband came here, he came from Johnson City, Tennessee. He worked in a tannery, and they closed the tannery there in Johnson City. And the people that moved up here transferred him and asked him if he'd like to come up here to work. And he said yes. So he came up from Tennessee here, and he worked at the tannery until they went on a strike. And he wasn't used to about the strike. He wanted to work, and then he said, well, if I don't get the strike, I'm going back home and visit. And so we went back to Tennessee. And then when he would come back, they asked him if he would be willing to work at the A&P store. That was under Fred Faust. And he said that you'd be there, and he could be the janitor of the A&P store. So he said, well, he would try it. So he came back and started working under Fred Faust at the A&P store. And he worked there until he retired at 65.
And the
And he worked, he never was without a job the whole time he was up here.
Is that right? Is that building still in existence, the
No.
A&P building?
That was right there at the corner of 6th and
It
Washington.
is now a parking lot.
It's a parking
It
lot.
is.
Parking lot.
I see.
And the Pensers were the printing place was right next door to it. And then there was another, of course, there was Allen and another two-story house on the north of it, and then on the Griffith house on the corner.
I'll bet most of those structures
That's
are
all
gone.
gone.
All been torn down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we got a lot of parking lots in town.
Oh,
now,
yeah.
I know that. So we've got a lot of those.
Well, I think that most of the parking lots down is for the help, for the people that work down.
Uh-huh.
And they was talking about building a parking place for parking guys. And after 6 o'clock on Friday and Saturday, there's no business downtown at all. So they wouldn't need a parking place downtown, a big building. Everything's going out.
I think the only factories that I can recollect that was actually hiring blacks was Mooney's Tannery. Some was hired at Cummins at that time, and also at Golden Foundry at that time. My brother Buddy, he was in high school when he started working at the Golden Foundry. He was just go there after school, start picking up bottles and things around the fence and stuff, and he retired after 47 years.
Foreman.
He was a supervisor. He's a foreman.
At Golden Foundry.
At Golden Foundry. He retired after 47 years.
And is that still in the same location?
Yes.
As it always has been, pretty much.
And there's
Used
quite
to
a
be-
few other blacks that have retired from there.
Mhm.
Was there quite a few years.
Some of
But
them
some of
did.
the other factories in town, they would not hire blacks.
So many blacks worked at the Golden Foundry then.
Mhm.
I see.
And if they would take a survey now, you'll find that majority of the blacks work at Golden Foundry and Cummins.
To this day.
In most of the factories, majority of the blacks work at one of those two places.
Well, let me ask you, do you feel people today have more equal opportunities than they might have had 10, 20, or even 30 years ago in Columbus?
Oh, yeah. They do.
I think overall they do. I think that Columbus still has its problem areas. Some of them being some of the recent problems, like say with our police department, and there are isolated incidences that happen throughout Columbus. But overall, I think it is definitely better, for all minorities, not just blacks, but Hispanics, Asians, Orientals. The opportunity is definitely greater. But there still are those isolated incidences that do happen throughout Columbus. And it still is a problem that needs to continue to be addressed here in Columbus.
I think most of the blacks now that have positions like at Cummins, they have to do more to prove themselves than the white peers have to do in order to get a position. In fact, what I'm saying, they have to give maybe 200% where the others don't maybe give 100%. They have to prove themselves that they can actually do the job a lot of times before they get any good positions. And I know there's a lot of them that are well qualified for a lot of good positions in a lot of these factories, but they just don't get the opportunity to get them. And a few of them do get breaks and do get these positions because they apply themselves maybe a little harder than some of the others.
Do you think there's a lot of opportunity for a educated black as much as an educated white to come to this town and get a job, say, at Cummins Engine, or as a teacher, or as a doctor, perhaps?
Well, it's a little toss up there a little bit.
Yeah.
But there's very few blacks in the professional field. Like, we have very few black teachers in Columbus. We have very few, in fact, we only have one black doctor in Columbus. We have 2 black policemen. We have 1 black fireman. And there's a lot of black people in Columbus that are qualified for those jobs. And there have been quite a few blacks that have applied for those jobs. And for some reason, minor reasons, they have been turned down. And when you ask for, I know in some cases when you ask for a reason, they don't have a concrete reason. And if someone really wanted to push it and really push it real hard, we could force them into giving them a reason why certain people don't get certain jobs in the city of Columbus.
When you look at the bigger industries and some of the bigger companies like Cummins, Arvin's, NTN, Onkyo, the larger companies like that who are an international company, I think everyone has an equal opportunity. But when you're looking at the smaller companies that are just, say, Columbus-based, maybe they started in Columbus and they operate just mainly in Columbus, I see that is where minorities have a harder time getting in. The reason I don't know, but I do know that it does seem to be harder. I think, obviously, when you're dealing with a larger company, particularly a company on an international level, for good business reasons and good diversity within their company, it behooves them to hire, multi-ethnic people, whereas a smaller company, I guess they don't want to have that luxury of expanding themselves. So.
I think a lot of your big factories, too, are hiring a lot of blacks because of the government contracts that they have to have. I think, and then it has stipulated they have to have so many certain things or certain people or something like that, there, a certain ethnic background. I think a lot of that is forcing a lot of them to do more hiring, not willingly, because if they want a contract, then they have to do that. But I don't think a lot of them in the higher positions in these factories, if it was up to them, some of them probably would not hire if it wasn't for the government contracts or stuff like that that they'd be getting.
I see.
And
Prentess,
that has been in the past.
just in the past?
That's been in the past too that they've done that. They had to have if they hire black, then they say, well, we had to have so many. Because when I worked at one of the factories in town, I know that when they get any kind of a government contract, they had to have so many blacks working, a percentage of blacks working at that factory. So they'll hire just enough to get by with in order to get the contract. Then they'll hire that many. Then after a while, then something comes up, they're there no longer.
I see. Prentess, you had a comment?
No.
No? Okay. I hope that the comments that we've made here today have some insight for the youth of Columbus. And let me ask another question, though, before we end this. But do you feel that this is a good community to live in for black people as well as white people in Columbus, Indiana? Anybody that chooses to answer. How do you feel about that, Prentess? Do you feel comfortable with Columbus and feel that you have lots of...
well, I feel comfortable because I've been here all my life. And I've been respected and treated. And there's people come up and speak to me and call me by my name. I don't know them, but they know me. And said a lot of people, I think, don't think of you as old past. You just think of the future. And I think that's what we got to look forward to now. That's what my children have to look forward to. We don't want to look back. We want to look forward.
I think, since you mentioned, I think especially in the school system, seem to be a lot of problems popping up in the school system. I think if the school system would start, it would integrate some black history into some of their classes. I think that would educate a lot of the young kids that's coming up on how the blacks really contribute to the building of the United States. And some of the greatest men that invented a lot of the stoplight. There was a black man that invented that.
Yes.
Invented the stoplight. And the switch for the train, a black man invented that. The Coca-Cola that they drank every day, a black man invented that. He was the one that had that.
And the plasma.
And the plasma. The black man was the first one that did heart surgery. Was a black doctor. Successfully.
This has been Black History Month.
But it seems like
in
they just do
Columbus.
stuff on Black History Month, but they need to do it, have a year-round curriculum
I agree
of Black
with you.
history so that they can tell, so the kids coming up now can know what the blacks actually went through in order to get where they are now. And there's a lot of books out there that they can get that has a lot of history in it other than just slaves here, they were slaves here and slaves there. Show them what they did when they got here. Let them get the books that tell them where they come from slavery to where they are now.
Let's
how the
look at the
struggle it
blacks in
was.
industry, technology,
Yeah,
education.
the struggle that they went through to
and
get where
what's-
they're in and what
what's
they
like
contribute to these United States.
I see what you mean. I think you're right. We don't emphasize that enough in the schools, and I think that I may be as guilty of that sometimes as others, but there's not enough emphasis of it in the schools at all.
A lot of the things that the black people have done, the whites don't know. It's not in the books.
It's in the books, but they just don't get the right books.
Well, I mean, it's in a book where
Yeah.
everybody has
Yeah.
a chance at.
There's a lot of black inventors. There's a lot of blacks out here that's done so much that people just don't know about. And if they be able to learn about it, read about it, maybe they can understand a lot of things better. That's the way I believe.
There's more beyond the wall than just the black athlete. You know, so many of the kids in school, they look up to black athletes, and beyond that, they
That's
don't
all.
know anything about a black person.
I can tell you who
about the
played
history.
basketball back here or
Right.
this back here. They can go down and name them, but they can't go through and name any of the black inventors, anything like that. They don't know, and there's some blacks that don't know too.
I agree. Does anybody have any closing comments about?
I'd like to comment on your last question. You did ask if we think that Columbus was a good community to live in. I think Columbus is a great community to live in. It is a great place, obviously, to raise a family because although Columbus has its problems, Columbus still tries to strive to stay, I guess, open-minded as far as looking at culture, looking at people, and looking at better ways to help improve the life of the community. I think Columbus does strive to do that. Again, Columbus is not a perfect community, although we would all like to think that it is. I don't think there is any perfect community. If so, then all of our other communities would be empty. But Columbus is a great place. I've had the opportunity to travel around the world. I've been to 19 different countries, numerous cities, and I chose to come back to Columbus, Indiana, to do my career and to also raise my family. So Columbus is a great town. It is a great town.
Anyone else? A comment?
I agree with Alan that Columbus is really a great town. Like he said, we do have our problems, but most of our problems we've been able to handle, and we've strived and come forward and everything. And this is where I live. This is where I want to continue to live, and I can't think of any place else I would want to live. I've not lived, but I've been to other cities where I got other sisters that live and other brothers that live, and they're nothing like Columbus. I mean, Columbus is a great town, and it's one of those things where when we were kids, Alan and myself, I could tell you the names of every black person in Columbus. I tell you their names, we could tell you their wives, tell you how many children they had, and so forth. Now, we've got so many people here, black people here in town, that there's a lot I haven't seen. They've been here for 10 years, and I've never seen or met them. And there's one thing that we have to start doing is the black people communing back and forth with each other. I mean, I'll walk down the street and I'll speak to someone and they'll look at you and just keep right on going. And, that's not what I was brought up. When I was brought up, you speak to someone, they speak back. But we've got quite a few people here in town that, black people. And it's nice.
It's a nice, as I said, it's a nice place to live, and there's not a whole lot to do for blacks in Columbus for entertainment or something like that. There, they have to maybe go to Indianapolis or Louisville or somewhere like that. There, and that is discouraging some that are coming in or working at Cummins. There's not really a lot of activity for the blacks to do in Columbus, and maybe some way or another they can work towards that goal too, where there be more to do for the blacks and also for the teenagers. there's not a whole lot for the teenagers in Columbus to do. But
I think that's
right up and
true.
down the
Black-
streets, so
Black
black and
and
white.
white.
That's true.
But I think
Black
if
and
they
white, there's
can
not a lot
find
to do.
some place where they can go, where a lot of kids that are in school together, they can communicate better, they can go and have activities together and stuff like that there, I think Columbus will be it'll be even better than it is now, a better community to live in. As he said, it is a nice community to live in. I've been here all my life. I was raised and born here, went to school here, my kids were, and everything like that, but it's great, but it could be better. It could be better.
Well,
As I said, there's no activities for blacks to do.
no special clubs
No,
or anything like that.
Now, when my children come up, we had to go clear to North Bend to skate. They had a skating park here on 4th Street, but the blacks couldn't go there.
Well, they got now.
But they do. They can't.
But
go
they
now.
can go
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
to
Skate
skate
land
land
now.
and places
Yeah.
like that.
But
now.
when they was coming up, we
Um,
North Vernon, Seymour, Shelbyville, the skating parties.
Well, as I have a 6-year-old, and raising him, I sure hope that he doesn't have to see the things that I saw, how my family felt about blacks when I grew up in Muncie, because I'm sure that he won't.
Well,
But,
it's up to you.
It's yes, that's right.
You're
That's,
the wife.
that's,
It's up
that's,
to you.
It's up to me.
to the parents.
But they were some terrible times and just terrible language sometimes. I remember when Martin Luther King would come on television sometimes, and my father would just stand there and curse him, and I would just think, oh my, it's just the influence I'm going to get.
Well, that you can hear that. You can hear a lot of comments on that nowadays. Now too, when they come on, they call him everything but a black man. I mean, I've actually heard it, and you just have to just walk away and just ignore it, because it's just mostly ignorance. Because he wasn't just for the blacks; he was for everybody. Anybody that was down, he was for everybody, not just the blacks. He was everybody. If they would look at the marchers, they can see that there was a lot of whites and a lot of blacks both in those doing their marchings. And if you're in that group, you got beat just like everybody. Because you can see it a lot on TV. You can see it. But it's a lot of things. People people just not educated enough on things that they should be educated on. And I think some of them are too much educated on things that really don't really matter as much as something like this does. They always say you never get enough education, but I was always told there's educated people and there's educated fools.
Right. I agree. I guess I felt like I had to get away from my own parents and my own home before I really became educated and more sensitive to some things because of the environment that I lived in.
We was always brought up, treat people like you would like to be treated. And that's the way we try to do.
Well, in closing, I'd like to, does anybody have any other comments they'd like to make right now? I really appreciate talking with the Smith family today and hope that this has offered some insight to what things are like for black people in Columbus, Indiana, and white people as well. And I'd like to thank the Smith family for coming and talking with us today and wish you the best, and
Thank you.
we'll go from there. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
talking.